Well, hello and welcome to Movie Night Tonight. I'm your host, Nathanael Molnár. I'm joined by Rob Giachinta. Rob, thanks for being here.
Hey, what's going on?
Oh, nothing much. Just the joys of being self-isolated amidst this pandemic.
Yeah.
Great, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Movie Night Tonight is a show we do every single week where each month is a new theme, each week is a new movie. So we watch a new film and we discuss it in depth. And this month, we are currently doing Courtroom Dramas. And the movie we're discussing tonight is Philadelphia from 1993. So how this is going to work is we're going to start off by giving our first impressions of the film. And we are talking about Philadelphia in full spoilers. We are talking about this film as if you watched it with us. So, Rob, I want to know, what are your first impressions of 1993's Philadelphia?
Well, you're supposed to ask, how many times have you seen the film?
That is true. How many times have you seen Philadelphia?
This is the first time I ever watched it. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it, actually. It was a movie that I probably had a bunch of opportunities to watch, but never really had the interest to watch it. But through movie night tonight, I was required to, and I watched it, and I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was a very good story, and it's a story that should have been told, and especially for the time that it was told, I think it was very uplifting to see a movie like this get made back then.
Definitely. I feel pretty much the same way. This was also my first time seeing Philadelphia, and I feel the exact same way. I thought it was a very well told film. I really like Jonathan Demme as a director. And just 2 years before this, he had done Silence of the Lambs, which won Best Picture and is one of my favorite movies. Like, that's
Best director, best actor, actress, screenplay, everything.
Phenomenal film. That probably is in a top 20,
Never seen
25.
it, actually.
You've never seen Silence of the Lambs?
We were supposed to do it for one of the things.
Yeah, when we were going to do our month of detective movies.
That one ended, so I never got around to it.
You know what I realized? This occurred to me last night, and I wish it had occurred to me earlier. So this month of April, when we started Movie Night Tonight, we're only doing 3 weeks. We'd already done one of the 4 weeks of the detective movies. So what we should have done was April, we should have used these 3 weeks to finish detective movies and then do Courtroom Dramas for next month.
Hey, that's on you.
Yes, it is. It is completely on me. But we're doing Courtroom Dramas anyway. So for detective movies, I think we were going to do Silence of the Lambs. We were going to do Prisoners. And there was another one we were going to do. I can't remember what it was. But
Detective Pikachu.
Yes, the ultimate detective film. So we were going to do Silence of the Lambs. But that is one I definitely recommend. Silence of the Lambs is phenomenal.
Maybe I'll have time to watch it. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I know you've got a super busy schedule, packed to the brim with so many things to do, as do I. But so Philadelphia comes out 2 years after Silence of the Lambs, after Jonathan Demme wins Best Director, wins Best Picture, has all the success, and then he does Philadelphia. And you were mentioning earlier, and I think this is probably the biggest point of this movie, is the time in which it came out. Because this is a movie that comes out in 93 where there is still a lot of misinformation and hatred and prejudice against LGBTQ plus people, as well as people who have AIDS and have HIV. A lot of people didn't know the facts of what was actually going on in 93. There's still a lot of people today who, and I'll admit, I didn't know too much about what actually happened during this epidemic in the mid 80s. After we watched the film, I did a little bit of research in preparation for this episode, and I learned a lot of details both from the film and from the research. I think it's something that still a lot of people don't know too much about, and there is a lot of misinformation about what it is, how someone gets HIV, who has HIV, and all those things. And for this movie to come out in 93, just so recent after the epidemic, and there were still lots of people suffering from HIV at the time that this movie came out. And I was researching a little bit into the film, and the studio had a lot of big concerns about, are people actually going to come see this movie? And part of the reason why they got Tom Hanks to be the lead star, part of the reason why they got Bruce Springsteen, actually the big only reason they got Bruce Springsteen to do the opening song, which ultimately won Best Original Song. It was nominated for 2 Best Original Songs, by the way, which is interesting. But in it won Best Original Song. They got Bruce Springsteen to do the song Streets of Philadelphia to try to get people to come see this movie. Because they were thinking people aren't going to go see this movie, or people don't want to go see this movie.
Yeah.
They didn't even really market that it's about HIV or a gay person who has HIV or anything like that.
Do you think that if Jonathan Demme didn't win Best Director and have Silence of the Lambs blow up in 91, do you think he would have had the clout with studio or like respect to even get this movie made? Or do you think
I don't know. I mean,
I feel like that has a lot to do with it, with them saying, okay, this guy just came off a major success. I mean, we got to give him the benefit of the doubt on this one.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely.
Gamble, too.
And one of the things I saw when I was looking up was that part of what prompted Jonathan Demme to do this film is that he had a close personal friend who died of AIDS. And so that kind of made him say, I really want to tell this story. Now, it wasn't the exact story that this movie was based off of, but this was a period of time that, I mean, I think you can look at, not that the two are exactly comparable, but look at everything that's going on with coronavirus right now, and the amount of misinformation that's out there that people have about what it is, how you get it, who has it, the amount of hysteria that's been built up. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the deaths between AIDS and coronavirus are, I mean, AIDS had a lot more deaths and a lot more people infected. And there was also, I mean, coronavirus doesn't necessarily have prejudicial stigmas surrounding it, whereas HIV and the AIDS epidemic happened in a period of time where a lot of people hated gay people. And you had at the time, you had doctors who were refusing to help people with AIDS because they didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to catch HIV, or which that's not how you catch it. They didn't want to catch HIV. They didn't want to help people with AIDS. You had research into try to figuring out, how do we curtail this? What's even going on? It was being completely massively underfunded. You had the president of the United States at the time, Ronald Reagan, just kind of refusing to do anything about it because he didn't want to get involved in what they referred to as the gay plague. And so looking at coronavirus now and the response to it and the amount of misinformation about it and how people get worked up, and then thinking about, okay, well, now take that 30 years ago, 35 years ago, and make it something that's more charged of an issue relating to a group of people that were massively disenfranchised. It's really something to think about. And something I had no idea, and I was looking this up. So at the time that the epidemic happened, they put in place travel bans for people who have HIV. And so if you had HIV, you couldn't enter the country, you couldn't ride on airplanes, and you had to declare it on your passport, and it would be marked on your passport if you had HIV. You want to know what year that was finally lifted?
Maybe 2000.
2010.
Oh, real? Wow.
2010, they finally said, you know what, people who have HIV are okay to ride airplanes because it can't be transmitted. 2010.
Gee.
It's
I mean, I guess I could get it when it first started, just because, I mean, I guess they didn't necessarily know, like, if it was, like, necessarily contagious or how,
yeah.
But, like, I mean, down the line, once it was realized that you couldn't just get it by standing next to somebody, like, it should have been lifted.
Yeah, and you had multiple presidents through that time, I think like Clinton, Bush,
Both Bushes.
both Bushes, Obama, you had all of
Yeah.
them saying, don't worry, we'll lift it, not lifting it, not lifting it. I don't, and then 2010 would be what,
Obama.
like a year into Obama's first term. So you went through like at least 3 or 4 presidents saying, and actively publicly saying, we're going to lift it, and then not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so for this movie to come out in 1993 with the message that it has, trying to inform people more accurately about what's going on, I think this was a very bold film. And I think it's a very important film in that sense. And I know a lot of historians and film historians credit Philadelphia as being one of the movies that sort of helped shape public opinion about HIV and AIDS. So, but let's get into the actual film itself. So, let's talk about Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks won his first of 2 Best Actor wins with Philadelphia, and he's fantastic in this movie.
I agree. He's fantastic. I don't know. I kind of resonated more with Denzel Washington's character and his story. I like his character. I thought had, I don't know, the more interesting, like, just because of just the two kind of sides of, like, he had this hate towards gay people, but at the same time, you know, he knew it wasn't right how Tom Hanks's character is being treated. And I found that the most interesting part of the movie, to see a man struggle with what he believes and, you know, what is actually right.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I do really like the Joe Miller story that's part of this. And I thought Denzel Washington was really good in the movie. And I mean, it's kind of interesting because I feel like other than the trial and him sort of having AIDS, there isn't too much depth with the Andy Beckett character. Like, we don't really have, I feel like there was missing a couple of scenes where we kind of delved a little bit deeper into who he is as a person.
He's
And I
kind
think,
of rushed in the beginning, I think.
yeah,
And just get right at, like, it just like what? I'd say the first 15 minutes he's already fired almost.
yeah, something like that. And I think the opera scene was a scene that was really good in trying to kind of give us more of a window into who Andy is, and that was, I thought, one of the more beautiful moments of the film, because you kind of have Andy revealing more of a vulnerable part of him. You have especially Joe revealing a more vulnerable part of him, and you could tell he's very emotionally affected by what's going on, but he's sort of hiding it and not really wanting to show how he's feeling. I almost wish what would have happened if Joe had actually knocked on his door and went back in as opposed to walking away.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I thought, so while the Andy Beckett character was sort of missing an extra layer of depth that I think he could have had, I thought Tom Hanks's performance was great.
I agree.
And I wouldn't necessarily say it's my favorite Tom Hanks performance.
No, I wouldn't even say it's his best, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't seen Forrest Gump, so I can't really
I wouldn't even say that's his best either.
I think Castaway is one of my favorite performances.
I would even say something like Big, too. I don't know if you're...
Yeah, I mean, Big is great. So, I mean, Tom Hanks is just one of the best.
He was excellent in the Mr. Rogers movie, too.
Yeah. And Captain
Phillips, that was another one, yeah.
Yeah, he has so many great performances. Toy Story, brilliant.
It is, and you have to say, like, I feel like with animation, like, there's a lot of movies where, like, just voice casting is just like whatever, but then there's just like the quintessential voice of, like, a Robin Williams as the genie, and I feel like Tom Hanks and Tim Allen as Woody and Buzz is right up there now too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So let's talk about Denzel Washington's character for a little bit. So you're pointing out that he was sort of the character that you latched onto more and resonated more with you. And I agree. I like his character arc throughout the film. And I'm curious what you think of this. I felt like there was a little bit in the resolution of his character by the end of the movie that was missing. In that we had this big setup where he was sort of there were multiple occasions where he was reaffirming he has a prejudice against gay people. And that was set up, but then you see throughout the trial, he's getting closer with Andy, he's being more open-minded, but by the end of the movie, we don't really have that sort of definitive scene where you see that Joe Miller has changed in terms of his perception. It's mostly implied in that he's spending a lot of time with Andy. He is making his cases in court. And so it's more implied through the amount of time he's spending working on this case that his perception and his mind has changed. But we don't really have a scene at the end of the film or at any point in that third act that really shows, like, definitively his mind has changed. Now, part of that can be that this is an ongoing thing for him, that this is sort of a defining moment in his life that starts that sort of change where he starts to evaluate himself and start thinking, well, why do I have these prejudices? Why do I think the way that I think? And that's a revelation that will come later in his life. But I don't know, did you feel like that was missing at all?
Yeah, I thought a lot of the movie, I think even towards like halfway through, I just thought that the character just, he, I think in his heart, he believed that, there's nothing wrong with being gay or anything like that. But he had a tough time, letting it be like publicly known that he was like that. Like you could even see that like scenes like in the bar where they're chirping at him and then like he just gives in and like says that. But I don't know. I never truly believed that he fully felt like that. I felt it was more of a way of him just pulling off the facade that, oh yeah, like I hate gays too, just like the rest of you guys.
But
Whether that makes it, I don't think it's right, but I think that's where he was coming from.
Yeah. I would say, though, that like when you have that scene near the beginning of the film where he's talking to his wife in the kitchen,
yeah,
I feel like he's not, because his wife is more taking on the point of, okay, you're like, she's not completely condemning him, but she's just sort of like, all right, you clearly have a prejudice. And he's saying, you know what? No, I do have a prejudice. I think this is disgusting. I think this, I think that. And he's not necessarily trying to prove anything to anyone at that point. I think that's him really showing, this is how I think. And then I think as the film goes on, you get to moments like in the bar, as you were mentioning, and you have points in court where he makes certain remarks. And then I think his arc is implied in that if you look at one of the first scenes of the film, when Andy goes in to get to try to get Joe to represent him, and they shake hands and he says, I have AIDS, and he's like backing up. And then you look at the very last part of the film where he's sitting on his deathbed and they're like hugging, and he's like, you see the jump that Joe has had and how things have changed for him, but you don't really get that sort of cathartic moment where you realize that Joe's perception, or that Joe has really come to understand why he thinks that way and really delve into that. And that, I think, might have been missing a little bit. But I think one could make an argument that that's at that point of the movie's already 2 hours, that they've already, the climax of the film is the end of the trial, and you don't necessarily need to get into all of that for the climax, but it also could have worked really nicely. So I think there's a few different points there. But one part I thought was interesting about the making of this movie. So Ron Voiter is an actor, and he played the lawyer. The character's name was Bob Seidman. He was the lawyer who, in the trial, he was the one who on the stand said that he suspected that Andy had HIV, but didn't say anything to the other members of the firm. The actor Ron Voiter, was HIV positive at the time of the filming. And TriStar Pictures, who co-financed the film, they originally didn't want him to play the character. They thought that there was going to be some insurance issues with having him covered, and they really didn't want someone who had HIV to be involved in the film. And Jonathan Demme had to go to them and say, you do know that that is entirely hypocritical to the point of the whole movie.
Yeah.
And they were like, all right, fine. But I think that is very emblematic of the attitudes that were still going on at the time of that the movie was coming out.
Yeah, I agree. I know it's crazy that something like that would happen. I mean, well, like if you're making a movie about like the same issues, how can you let the same thing go on at your company? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, it's so. I think that is very. It shows how sort of pointed this film was, and when it came out in '93. So last episode on Movie Night Tonight, we sort of defined what we thought courtroom dramas were and what they represented. Some of the things we talked about were that courtroom dramas sort of show that there was always this search for truth and justice and fairness, and how a lot of the times that doesn't live up to those ideals that we kind of put on the justice system. And so kind of looking at what we sort of see as courtroom dramas and what courtroom dramas elements we see in Philadelphia, I was curious, how would you say Philadelphia fits in with those archetypes for courtroom dramas?
I'd say it's similar in a way, like kind of like the last movie we did, 12 Angry Men, in which we have characters that want what's right and what's just, and then we have characters that are kind of just looking out for themselves and can't put their heads around like a different situation, only think in one way. And in this movie, we get to see the actual courtroom, not just the jury like the last movie. But I also thought it was interesting that we get to see a little bit of the jury too. I thought we got some good scenes with that too. But yeah, I'd say this was more of a courtroom drama than the last movie we did, in which we actually get to see the lawyers interact and such.
Yeah, the last one was more of a jury room drama, and this is the courtroom drama. But yeah, no, I agree with you. You see those points of overlap with 12 Angry Men, and I think it's interesting because I feel like even so 12 Angry Men, you kind of, while you had the characters trying to assess whether the person was guilty or not guilty, the point of that film was that it was unraveling the points of the case, and you were kind of figuring out all the details as it was going on. I feel like with this movie, it was a lot more clean cut as to what's going on. And so it wasn't so much rather trying to find the truth of what's going on. It was rather, are people going to put aside their own prejudices to act fairly and justly? It was more with the last film, with 12 Angry Men, it was more, we have to work through whether this is true. Let's sift through all the facts that we have to find the actual truth and figure this out. Whereas this one, it's more, we kind of already know what's true and what's not true. Let's see if people actually have the courage to act justly.
I agree.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting part of this film. And so you do have the overlap of the characters acting for their own self-interest and then the characters who are trying to seek the truth. So I do agree, though, it is more of a courtroom drama than 12 Angry Men. And I think 12 Angry Men has like one minute scene in the actual courtroom. So, but I do think 12 Angry Men, ironically, even though it really doesn't take place in a courtroom at all, I do kind of still count as a courtroom drama. It has that.
Yeah, I don't have any qualms about it.
No. But I think I do agree. Philadelphia has far more the courtroom drama feel to it.
I don't know if you're a Bruce Springsteen fan. I actually liked the original movie, music that was composed for this movie. I mean, I know it might have just been kind of a gimmick, but I actually thought the music and the score added a lot to this movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of The Boss. Uh, all I could think of when I was listening to it was Blinded by the Light.
Same.
But no, I mean I like the song. And I do like the score was very good. The score was done by Howard Shore,
Oh, nice.
who's just a fantastic composer. I love all of his work. Yeah, I thought, and another thing though, like, because I thought the score and song that really kind of helped put you in the mindset of what's going on into reality. Also, another thing that kind of put you into the reality of what's going on is they filmed it in an actual courtroom as opposed to a set.
Oh, really?
Which, yeah, so I thought that added a little bit more to the film, and it's one of those things where I think if it was a set as opposed to an actual courtroom, nobody was really going to tell the difference. But it just added a little bit more to it, in that it just added this extra layer of reality to it. And I think that's something that this film ultimately does really well, is just reaffirming the reality of what's going on. And I know that there have been some criticisms about this film in that it doesn't completely portray the absolute severity of what it's like to go through AIDS and the actual horror. Like, it's more about the courtroom drama element, the legal issue of, did they fire him because he has AIDS? And that is more of the focus, as opposed to a person struggling with AIDS, which I understand. However, I would say that was more the story of this film. That while the main character does have AIDS, this isn't a Andy Beckett movie about his childhood and his life and everything. This is a larger story about this lawsuit particularly. And I thought, for what it was trying to be, especially the time that it came out, where you maybe couldn't really have any of the studios would be willing to finance a movie that was just a straight up movie about a person with AIDS and their life and their struggles. That's more something we can do as more of a retrospective piece. I thought that the story that Philadelphia was going for with the film that we got, I thought it was ultimately the right story to tell. And while I recognize those criticisms, I don't know if those were necessarily the point of this particular movie.
Yeah, I think describing those two things, I feel like it's almost like you're talking about two different movies almost. I feel like if you had all that other stuff added, it just would have, I think it would have affected the pacing of the film, and I think the film would have suffered from it. I think this movie had, a clear vision on what it wanted to say and the story it wanted to tell, and I think it did a good job. And any added other stuff to it, I think could have bogged it down, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. The main story was to be this legal drama. And while maybe they could have done a little bit more in going deeper into Andy's character, while maybe they could have shaped up the arc of Joe a little bit more than they did, these are all sorts of, I think, ultimately nitpicky things, because the movie itself is a really good movie. It had a set purpose that it was supposed to do in 1993, and it ultimately did that. And while they maybe could have improved certain parts of it to do that even better, I thought the job that they did was really good.
I think one thing they could have maybe did is at the end credits, you know how a lot of movies, like when there's an end credits on something that like actually happened, like they have some text explaining things. They could have maybe had some text showing like the facts about AIDS, and just a quick little like reminder about just the whole situation of it. I mean, that I could have seen that working.
That's a good
But
point.
that's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah. I agree that would have been beneficial. And at the same time also, there are other movies that have come out, that will come out, that will kind of tell those elements more in depth. I haven't seen Dallas Buyers Club, but isn't Dallas Buyers Club about Matthew McConaughey's character is HIV positive?
It's yes, he is. I'd say that movie's because he's a character who has AIDS, but it's not necessarily like how he necessarily struggles with AIDS. It's about how he and this Jared Leto's character figure out a way to smuggle the drugs to cure AIDS, and they basically have like their own like pharmaceutical black market company out of their apartment or whatever. But that movie does a pretty good job with showing what happens with AIDS and stuff like that. That's a good movie too.
Yeah, that has been one of those movies for a long time where
it's on Netflix.
Yep, another movie on Netflix that I want to see, just haven't had a chance yet. But hey, coronavirus, maybe now we can finally watch Dallas Buyers Club. And that's something I love. Taking the incredibly unfortunate situation we're all in currently, a great side benefit of it is that we get to catch up on some movies.
Yeah.
And I have been trying to utilize this time to catch up on some stuff. And movie night tonight is also a good excuse for that, because I probably would not have watched Philadelphia on my own.
I would have never. Yeah. To be honest. Not that I didn't think it just, I don't know. Sometimes just when movies came out a long time ago, and it's not like this movie, like, if Tom Hanks didn't win Best Actor for this movie, I feel like you would never hear about this movie ever again.
Yeah.
Not that it's bad. It's just, there's some movies that are good and, good stories, but they just fall through the cracks,
Yeah. Some movies serve a particular purpose for when they're released.
Mm-hmm.
And they're incredibly effective and influential for that, but then they don't necessarily have lasting power after that.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of us over time will remember the performances more than the actual movies themselves. I kind of agree with that with Dallas Buyers Club as well.
Yeah, because the movies sort of become like a footnote in the history books as to and Tom Hanks won his first Oscar for Philadelphia, and then that's how Philadelphia is ultimately remembered. And
I bet if you asked people like our age, they might not even know what the movie is or even ever heard of it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And so I'm glad that we had the opportunity to watch this film, because like I said, and like we both said, this isn't one that we would normally kind of just choose on our own. And I really like Jonathan Demme as a director. I would highly recommend Silence of the Lambs, because that is in my top probably 20-25 all-time favorite movies. Which
I know he passed away a couple years ago.
Yeah, he did. Which, I mean, sad, because he was a great filmmaker. But he was getting up there in age, wasn't he? I think he was like in the 70s or 80s or something.
Yeah, I think he had cancer though, or something like that.
So, as we go into our final thoughts on Philadelphia, Rob, what are your final thoughts on the film?
It's a good movie, good story, and I'm glad I watched it. I don't think I necessarily need to watch it again, but again, I'm glad we have something like movie night tonight that can kind of persuade me into watching films like this. And we got great performances, and and I was left with a good message, and I think I'd give it a 3.85 out of 5.
Nice. So yeah, Philadelphia. I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was very well made. I thought the performances were all really good. I think especially for the time that it came out in, it was a very important movie, and one that served a very important purpose. And while maybe it didn't have all the opportunities to go into as much depth as some people would like, I think it sort of it was the first real movie to talk about HIV and AIDS. And to think that it took them almost a decade to really start to have that conversation in the form of their media, I think this is an incredibly important movie. And it's one that I'm glad I watched, and it's one that I'm glad I learned more about, because as I said at the beginning of this episode, I didn't know that much about HIV or AIDS or the epidemic that happened in the mid-'80s. I didn't know a lot of these details. And so I'm glad that this movie was able to inform me, and that it prompted me to do a little bit more research. because I think a lot of these things in history that are things that people experience and then forget or just kind of are not remembered as much as time goes on. I mean, to think about with Corona, there's in like 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years, we're going to remember it as a memory. And then there's going to be new people born who don't even really know that much about it.
We'll have a Corona movie.
Yep. Think of how many Corona movies there's going to be. There's going to be tons of them. I guarantee you there's probably about 50, at minimum, 50 screenwriters who are right now writing Corona scripts.
Oh, there's a family that's, stuck together during quarantine, then they start to unravel.
Oh, yeah. Like, they're down to the last Pop-Tart. What happens in this family of 5? And they can't go to the store else they're going to die. Yeah, like we're going to get 10 Cloverfield Lane, but it's Corona. So, anyways, and if I were to give a rating, I'd give Philadelphia a 4.2 out of 5.
Nice.
So that has been our discussion of 1993's Philadelphia. Next week, we're concluding Courtroom Dramas with our discussion of 12 Angry Men, of Few Good Men. 12 Angry Men, A Few Good Men. So we're going to be doing that next week. Once again, I'm Nathanael Molnár. I'd like to thank Rob Giachinta for being here. Thanks for joining me. So keep your eyes out. Next week, we will be doing our discussion of A Few Good Men. Make sure to like, make sure to comment, make sure to subscribe. You can also find Movie Night Tonight on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, so you can stay up with it till then. And next Saturday is when our discussion of A Few Good Men drops. So until then, thank you for listening.